Okay. What kind of American are you? You don't know?
Hello everyone, and welcome back to Back Lot Banter, your favorite long-form discussion on the most divisive film of the year show on the internet. I am Tanner Extra. I am joined here by my uncommon movie review co-host, Abram Buhner, returning back in the year 2024. We did a couple in late last year, some discussions here, but we're here to talk about the film Civil War. Alex Garland's A24's Civil War. It is out in theaters right now. And as I said, one of the most divisive films of the year. It is sort of like playing into that. So we're here to talk about sort of our thoughts on it, dig into the themes and what does it all mean? Is it singing anything? And is that something good or bad? We'll talk about it.
We will.
But if you want to have your thoughts heard, you can sound off in the comments down below or join our Discord server. That link is in the description. Go ahead and like this video, and like I said, leave us your thoughts on Civil War in the comments, because it seems like everyone has a very different experience when they watch this film. Everyone has different thoughts on it, and that's true of the two of us as well. We saw this a couple days ago, so we've had a couple days to stew on it and really think it over, as well as at least I have read some other and listened to some other thoughts and critiques and reviews on it.
Yeah, I mean, so we'll just really quick give non-spoiler recommendation, not recommendation.
Yeah.
I probably wouldn't recommend Civil War.
You wouldn't? Okay.
No, I don't think so, because we're recording on a Sunday.
We
saw the movie Thursday night. Now, maybe it's because we saw the Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare, and
in between,
that's taken over my whole mind share, but I feel like Civil War hasn't really stuck in my mind all that much.
Okay.
And that is for a lot of reasons we'll get into, largely where I think the movie falls short in terms of like intellectually captivating me.
You sure?
Where it does succeed, obviously, is on this like visceral level.
Yeah.
As I was saying to some of my friends, there's like 5 sequences in here that are like so emotionally investing that they're gonna bang on TikTok.
Yes.
And this movie is gonna have an amazing life on VOD. And I just don't feel like this is that urgent of a movie to run out and see at the moment.
And I can totally understand from that standpoint why you might not recommend it to folks, because it's not like a running good time of super exciting stuff wall to wall. The moments where it does have action is actually quite harrowing, and these are sort of interrupted and sort of like spaced out by sequences of our characters driving around and talking, frankly, or montages of that at the same time. So from that standpoint, if you're going for like an action movie, the action is quite good, but also quite minimal relative to the runtime.
Yeah, that's not exactly what it is. Like you can't. I don't think you can go in expecting like a traditional big blockbuster out of this.
But it's also, if I can speak for both of us here, not a bad film.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well, we'll get into that. So I would say go see it. I mean, I am very rare to say to a general audience member, hey, don't go see this movie. Obviously, if there's like content issues with it, violence, gore, stuff like that, it's not going to be for you. But it's not, I think it's a perfectly entertaining film that is frankly spurring a lot of conversation in the culture right now. So from that standpoint, I think it's important.
I'll put it this way: if you have already seen Dune, you've already seen Love Lies Bleeding,
if you've already seen the Ministry of Ungentlemanly Warfare,
if you've already seen Arthur the King,
then go check out Civil War. No.
The last point I will make before we get into full spoilers is that I mean the sound design is quite exceptional.
Yeah.
So I mean, through that lens alone, it might be worth going to the theater.
If you're looking to watch it in the theater and not at home.
Yeah.
If
you're not looking to watch it, then don't worry.
Yeah, then don't worry about it. Okay, there's our recommendation or non-recommendation for you there. So, Abram, let's talk about Civil War as it stands as a cultural piece in its opening weekend.
Biggest opening weekend for A24.
Biggest opening weekend for A24. Amongst the highest post-pandemic openings for an original film, which is quite interesting as well. From an auteur in Alex Garland, who has grown more and more divisive as his film career has gone on, who has reportedly retired after this film. But that's not really not what's important to this.
No.
What's really important to Civil War is what a lot of people are talking about is the political stance of it, or the apolitical stance of it. So, Abram, it's been a couple days, and you were really drilling in on this in our post-movie conversation. Where are your thoughts standing right now on what Civil War is saying?
Yeah, I mean, I saw somebody on Twitter, and I don't remember the ad, unfortunately, something to the effect of, like, it's disappointing that so many people are going into Civil War with their mind already made up. And I have to be honest, I'm one of those people.
Yeah.
But I think what I was hoping for when I sat down with Civil War, coming in with the knowledge that Alex Garland has some very, I would say, shallow thoughts on the state of American politics.
Sure,
and this movie very clearly has been talked about as being quite apolitical in a manner of speaking, which we'll get into.
Yeah.
I already went in knowing I was going to be frustrated by the overall framework of the film. But what I was hoping for was that this would at least be far enough away from actual American politics and culture to where I can sort of get lost in its world, opposed to me trying to drag mine into it.
Perhaps more of what Alex Garland does with his previous 3 films or in TV shows, being like, it's a science fiction world. You're not looking... Yeah.
Right, and even in that case, you know, it's impossible to get away from what the premise is. But I was hoping at least, you know, there would be that divide between where we are and where the film is. But I think that my issue with Civil War ultimately, on this like more macro political level, is it's actually right over here.
Okay,
I feel like it is so specifically grounded in American culture of like the past. Since 2016, let's say.
Yeah.
That I think that it's harder for me to swallow its large indifference to its premise.
Okay.
I think that when it comes to the journalism side of things, I'm equally interested to discuss that because I don't actually find it that deep or that clear.
No, I think there is with the journalism stuff, and I want to talk about the politics and then get into the journalism because they are 2 completely separate spheres, of course, in our real world. No, I'm joking, but I think there's a lot of nuance or maybe confusion there, depending on how charitable you want to be. But as for the political stance, I have, as I've said, listened to a lot of people talking about this, including a couple short snippets of interviews from Alex Garland, and I am actually on the, like, literally when I got back from my walk today was right when the podcast I was listening to was switching over to a, like, hour and a half discussion with Alex Garland on it.
Yeah.
And through that lens, I think, I don't know, it's quite interesting what Alex Garland is doing here, I think, ultimately. I still find it confused, but also so in the weeds that it's become a thing where I'm like, I don't really know. Like, there's just so much discussion about it, and what did he mean, and is that good or not, or did he need to say something about the current moment, that ultimately I just kind of call it a wash.
Sure.
But to get specific on what I think the film is saying. So, leading up to the film, Alex Garland had these quotes about, left and right are just these political ideologies, and it really felt as though he was trying to be a centrist on this, and
have the quote,
and kind of say that perhaps we aren't that different. I think.
Yeah.
And maybe that's what he's trying to do with Civil War here is he in not giving us text on screen background on the film, which he was going to do. Apparently that was a previous version of the film, was going to have a, hey, here's the layout of what happened, here's where we kind of are, and having our protagonists be journalists who are effectively non-combatants. They aren't really taking sides in this. He is approaching what is a centrist look at a Civil War here. Now, I think there are inherently some things that paint one side worse than the other. But you have the quote pulled up here.
Yeah, so the quote, I don't remember who did the interview with, but I have the quote.
Yeah.
Well, I'll find it and put it in the description. We'll put the full article there. But, quote, left and right are ideological arguments about how to run a state. That's all they are. They are not right or wrong or good or bad. It's which do you think has greater efficacy. That's it. You try one, and if that doesn't work out, you vote it out, and you try again in a different way. That's a process, but we've made it into good and bad.
Now, this is a political stance that I think runs through Civil War as well, that I just morally disagree with.
Yeah.
That there are differences between, how you run a state is obviously a very vague term, but also impacts the lives of people.
Right.
Which is not necessarily something that we see a whole lot in Civil War, but it's part of this whole wider thing of like, the left and the left and right, the Republicans and Democrats, they're ultimately the same. They want the same things. Yeah. It doesn't really matter who you vote for. No, that very much matters, and they're very much are ideologies on what happens to people based on who's running that state.
Yeah, I mean, I think, and it's tough, right? At a certain point, to like, for me to top down and say, well, I lean very far left, and if the movie doesn't lean very far left too, then it's bad because it's got bad politics.
Yeah, and
that's not necessarily what I'm trying to do. Mm-hmm. I think what you're describing pretty clearly is that the premise of the centrism is flawed.
Right.
I think that it doesn't work in the context of the film because I don't think it really has anything to say about this point Alex Garland is making. Mm-hmm. The film actually has very little concern for the overarching state of America. It has very little time spent explaining what either side is. Mm-hmm. It doesn't really illustrate what is trying to be accomplished by anybody.
Yeah.
So I feel like I have a different inherent set of issues with centrism outside of this film.
Of course.
But I think when you look at it through that lens too, I don't think that this is a condemnation of two sides. I don't think it's an illustration of how two different sides have the same ideology that's bad in a similar way. I think it doesn't have anything.
No, yeah, because we obviously never learn what each side wants, necessarily. Right. They just want control of the continental United States.
Yeah.
And from what I said, that this film, either consciously or unconsciously, paints a bad side to it.
Yeah.
I think that bad side is what we would recognize as, like, the pre-existing American government, the one that the president, played by Nick Offerman, runs. He has, he's sort of gone into a third term. That's, it's sort of emblematic of a fascist president. He has not given any interviews in over a year. They apparently shoot journalists on site in Washington, D.C., in the Capitol. And, we have different interpretations of the Jesse Plemons character and which side he belongs to. But I feel as though he is part of that, pre-existing American government, and thus, is basically just killing civilians for the hell of it. And because of that, I feel as though that side is the one that's bad. And, with the fascist overtones of taking the third term, that is something that Alex Garland is condemning.
I mean, this is where it gets tricky, though, right? And this is where I was talking about there's not that much difference.
Yeah.
Because you can't have the premise, you can't have the largely unexplained premise for the movie be a president taking a third term and not have everybody walking in the theater say that that's Donald Trump.
Yeah, of course.
And I think that's part of my problem, and that's why maybe that earlier version that has more context would maybe make it easier to slip into its reality. But when you hear third term, anti-journalism, fascist-leaning president...
Yes.
I'm not sure where else your mind is supposed to go.
Dissolving the FBI as well.
The FBI. Yes. Like, I just don't know where else your mind is supposed to go.
Yeah.
And I think that is part of my big issue there. If I'm not supposed to read this as some sort of reflection of American culture, what am I supposed to read it as instead? Now, I had a really interesting point raised to me by a friend of mine that I work with who lives in the Netherlands.
Sure.
Who watched the movie and found it very interesting. And he made the point that Alex Garland is not American.
Of course, he's British. Yeah.
And in some ways, if you're not American watching this and you're an observer, all you can really do is observe. And the film is really interested in observation.
Yes.
So in some ways, I think you can chalk up what to me feels like maybe a lack of research or a lack of clarity of purpose with the fact that this is a non-American perspective that generally captures the malaise of American politics, which is interesting in its own right, but I've lived in America for 23 years.
Of course, and so we're coming in at it from that perspective, and there is something to Garland being an outsider coming in and tackling this material that I think is interesting, and I think, especially with, like, I did see a quote from him, or maybe an interpretation of something that he said about the whole California, Texas, the Western forces thing, to be very interesting. Because to us as Americans in 2024, it seems so far-fetched that California and Texas would be teaming up. You know, basically the hardest core red state and the hardest core blue state. But something that I had heard was that to an outsider, and even to us, we can kind of admit that if you're looking at the 50 American states and you're asking, hey, which two are the ones that seem to have the biggest like independent streak to them?
Sure.
As you know, Texas obviously was its own. You know, was independent for a time. California, there's always this conversation about, you know, if California was its own country, it'd be the 5th largest economy or whatever.
Right. Yeah.
So I think there's something interesting there about Garland making those the states to immediately secede.
I don't actually disagree.
Yeah.
And I think that, like, we know that there's a military consultant on the film.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, and this is I should have figured this out probably, but I'm sure there were some political consultants working with him too.
Yeah.
But there would have been actually something interesting to the fact that in the real world, Texas isn't actually as red as it used to be.
Yeah, I mean, we are coming up into a reality where state legislators in Texas are taking steps to ensure that it does not flip blue.
Yeah, and so there's actually a potentially really interesting premise of California flipping.
Yes.
From the purple, like the embattled purple state that it is right now.
Texas, you mean? You said California.
Sorry, yes. Yeah, I meant Texas. The embattled purple state it is flipping, and then suddenly you've got this interesting conglomeration of territories that could team up.
And
it's not a bad idea.
On top of that, there's also something that doesn't really get talked about in the film, but if you look at the official A24 Civil War map, there's also like I gotta pull it up for the exact, but it's like the People's Republic of the Northwest or something like that.
Okay, yeah.
That encompasses like Washington and Oregon.
There's
and stuff.
more factions than are discussed in the movie.
Yeah, of course.
And I think maybe this is the Star Wars fan in me talking, wishing for everything to be explained.
Sure.
But I do think that there is a better version of this movie out there that sort of reconciles some of these seemingly incongruous elements by just spending a little bit more time. Again, this is a journalism film.
Yes.
Couldn't we spend more time with reporters who were reporting on the formation of the Western Front? Couldn't we have done something to, through the eyes of these journalists, make it clearer what's being fought for and fought over? Because something I didn't quite realize, but is actually the main plot thread of the entire movie, is just getting to the president.
Yeah.
That's what the entire movie is, and as soon as we get to the president and we kill him, the movie ends.
Yes.
There's nothing after that.
Right.
We meet our characters at a protest.
We start in New York City, and we basically have to, in a roundabout fashion, like they kind of explain the route that they have to take, get to Washington, D.C. Yeah, and that's the goal.
And that route goes through Charlottesville.
That route does go through Charlottesville.
But this movie is not concerned with that.
No, absolutely not.
Which is another interesting thing. I mean, it's just another example to me of why I have a hard time dividing this, because we have Sammy, played by the guy who plays Sufir Hawat.
Stephen McKinley Henderson.
Thank you. Who is going to Charlottesville.
Yes.
And now that's a very culturally, socially, politically, racially charged idea.
Of course.
But it doesn't really go anywhere.
Right.
And so it's just more evidence to me of the fact that I think without changing the overarching idea of this movie, keeping the focus on journalists, you could have gotten just a little bit deeper into why is the map this way? What does the president want? The Western forces, they just want to get in there and kill the president, and then what? I think it's a criticism, but it's also sort of like a criticism that I want to couch praise within. Okay. Because it's a testament to the fact that I think that the intrinsic world building of Civil War is very good.
Sure, yeah.
And I think that a lot of the art direction is very good, and the production design is very good. There's clearly a lot of meticulous thought here, but I just feel like in the process of filtering out maybe anything that could be hazardous to this status as one of A24's biggest films, we lost a lot of the grit that could have made this maybe a clearer picture.
Sure. And I've always, something else I've considered is, I don't know how much more I would have enjoyed this film if it were more specific, if it were more explained, because I think you then run the risk of making it too. Obviously, this film is very of the moment. Alex Garland started writing this film in 2018. Yeah. But by making it so specific, I think you run the risk of giving it an expiration date essentially. Yeah. Like, is that date in 8 months or is it in another 4 years? Who's to say?
Yeah, and I mean, the other macro thing that I think we ought to talk about before we get deeper into it is just the status of this as a film releasing in 2024.
Yeah.
A24 is wanting to, I guess, for lack of a better term, play up. They're making bigger films. Still a lot of weird indie shit. I mean,
of course.
Love Lies Bleeding is a great example.
Yeah.
And a banger. But this, Hideo Kojima's Death Stranding, they are making big plays.
Yes.
And you can't scoff at the business sense of having this film out this year.
Yeah.
At the same time, as we've been talking about, I think part of the potentially sanded down nature, because again, to Alex Garland's credit, he is a very smart person, I would say. I've not seen Men.
Okay, fair.
I've seen Annihilation.
Yeah.
I've only seen his only other, I'd say, popular movie.
Alex Garland makes films that have clear ideas.
Right.
It's just about how well he brings those ideas home.
Yeah, and this might be tinfoil hat stuff, but I can't escape the idea that A24 and Alex Garland want this to be a big movie. And there's inherently a need to not alienate.
Well, what's interesting about that is that at a special event, perhaps the premiere of this, is another Garland quote that I've heard, is that A24 basically introduced him and said, "Hey, we're really excited to work with Alex. We've made 4 of his films now.
Yeah.
He obviously got us started back in 2015 when we were really popping onto the scene with a huge critical hit in Ex Machina, and then." Which has become a cornerstone A24 film.
Yeah.
To which Alex Garland responded, "Yes, I gave you your break onto the map, your cornerstone film, and now I'm giving you your Heaven's Gate," which is sort of like a deep cut cinematic reference to a massive box office flop and financial and production blunder in Heaven's Gate. But I also don't know if this is Heaven's Gate.
I'll be really curious to see how hard it falls off in the second weekend.
Yeah.
I mean, it has a B- cinema score.
Yeah,
which is not good.
Which is very interesting if we want to talk about how the general public is responding to this.
Yeah.
It's got a B- cinema score, and that's our best metric for people walking out of the theater. What do they think?
Right.
Because this film doesn't end especially satisfyingly, which is a lot of the issue that you're going to see with a cinema score like that. It also, this is, just based on our theater reactions.
Yeah.
It didn't seem as though, a lot of people were into it outside of the, admittedly, and I will admit this readily, very electrifying, well-made action sequences.
Yeah.
I think that's by nature of our characters not being super interesting.
Yeah, I mean, this is, I think, the ultimate problem of Civil War. Because, and I've said this analogy to you a million times outside of recording, I like Call of Duty a lot. I play the modern Call of Duty games a lot. And I think that there is a way where you can brute force past a lot of, frankly, left-leaning criticism by just having something really fucking exciting and high quality and good.
Yes.
And I think that Civil War is part of the way there. Again, as we're saying, I think there's a real, visceral quality to the filmmaking, but it's stitched together in a poor way, I feel.
Sure.
Because if we're thinking about the ending, the film literally ends as we've killed the president.
It ends on the gunshot that kills President Nick Offerman.
Yeah. But other than seeing Nick Offerman at the beginning of the film, when he's practicing the speech, and we hear him on the radio sometimes, he's not really built up as a threat. I don't feel. I
mean, he opens up the film, and the opening of the film is him practicing an address to the nation.
Yeah.
So it's not like he's coming out doing he's not coming out doing a warmongering thing.
Right.
It is something that grounds him essentially.
Yeah.
That lets us see a little bit behind the curtain of what's going on here. And then we see him on TV delivering that speech in Kirsten Dunst's hotel room with some explosions in the background.
And, I think that's okay, but I just feel like if the entire film is about killing the president, we need to be really scared of the president, I feel. Or the president needs to be a bigger force in the movie.
Okay, yeah.
But the film is so subjective in terms of just following our characters.
Well, I want to say.
Sure.
Because I can excuse it because it's not like our characters want to kill the president.
No, but...
It is unclear what our characters want, because they are journalists who want actually no, it's actually very clear what they want.
Well,
I take that back.
Yeah.
They know the president's going to be killed.
Yeah.
They ain't stupid. They know it's going down. So we want to be in Washington D.C. to talk to the president, to interview him,
And get the photo.
Before he dies.
Right.
Or before he is captured.
But I guess my point more is like in terms of the subjectivity, there's really no time when we cut away to other fronts of the war. We actually spend no time like in the cabinet of Nick Offerman's presidency,
Of course, yeah.
hearing what's going on. So we're following our characters on this very surface level mission of we want this story. All the way to until they get the story and the movie immediately ends.
Yep.
I think that lacks this larger sense of context necessary for this goal of killing the president.
Okay.
Or the goal of being there when they kill the president.
Yeah,
That's the best
yeah.
way to put it.
Yeah.
I just don't feel like he's built up to be anything. And it goes back, I think, partially to the issue of why does he want this third term? How did he get the third term? I think even understanding a little bit clearer, like, damn, he was a real force. I think that would have made it a little bit more satisfying.
Because when we entered the film, the standard American army is like on the back foot already. They are being pushed in. They are retreating to a final like defense at Washington D.C.
Yeah.
That's the context of the opening of the film, is that we basically are riding with the Western forces into like the final battle.
Which leaves us just with our characters.
Yeah.
And I think we should get into the characters.
Sure.
Now, because ultimately my point is just that there is so little explicit screen time for anything that is not our characters.
Sure.
So if we don't like them, it's hard to grab onto much.
Yeah. So our main character, our characters are Kirsten Dunst as Lee, Wagner Moura as Joel, and Cailee Spaeny as Jesse. Basically, you have your experienced photojournalist, your adrenaline junkie interviewer journalist, and then you're new to the scene, your cub reporter, essentially, in Cailee Spaeny.
Yeah.
And then Sammy is also there. He is like the elder statesman of them. He's old. He can't really engage with the stuff. He's not going to be. They say multiple times, if we get shot at, what are you going to do? It's not like you can be running around.
Yeah.
But he is there as maybe more of a voice of reason.
Yeah.
And so we're clearly tackling this from a perspective of, and Alex Garland is coming into it saying, journalists are impartial observers. We get glimpses of Kirsten Dunst in other foreign battlegrounds, seeing horrible things happen, and she can only stand there and take pictures. She cannot help people. She is just an observer in what is happening. At the same time, I think there is an equivalency in imagery drawn between, especially at the end when we're like running into the White House, between our characters being armed with their cameras and shooting, while the Western forces are armed with their guns and shooting.
There's this, and you had mentioned this when we watched it at the theater. There's this line to the effect of we take. What is it? We take the pictures so other people can ask the questions.
Yeah, it's like because Cailee Spaeny asked, what if I had told them to cut down the people hanging in the gas station, essentially? Yeah. And Kirsten Dunst's character, Lee, responds with, we just take the pictures so other people can ask the what if questions.
Yeah.
Which I find to be quite a idealistic, if I want to be positive, or misleading, if I want to be negative, view of journalism. Is that it is journalists' questions' job to ask questions. I mean, that's how you divine out a story in a situation. Yeah. And it's obviously quite different when we're looking through the eyes of photojournalists who are ultimately, at their mission, just there to watch what happens, put it in the history books.
Well, it's another point that my friend from the Netherlands was saying. It's like, this is the view of journalism I had when I was in school.
Yeah.
But he's also, like, twice our age.
Sure.
I think that the stance taken on journalism is removed completely from the context of the story being told.
Okay.
And Grace Randolph made this point.
Okay,
and I gotta give it to Grace.
Yeah.
Because I do think it is a salient point.
Okay.
And I even think the film acknowledges it in one way.
Sure.
The idea that photojournalism is not really that important anymore in a culture where all of the photojournalism happening that is really evocative and really moves people is amateur.
Yeah.
It's not conducted by journalists. It's this very digital, of the moment, social media, antithesis of analog war photography that you can possibly have. So I feel like in some ways we have these characters in a modern war scenario that are out of step with how actual journalism is even conducted anymore.
I mean, I think there's even I think, as you said, there's an acknowledgement of this, and I'm not sure what you found the acknowledgement to be, but I was trying to sort of divine out what the difference was between Lee's character and Jesse's characters, Lee's pictures and Jesse's pictures, essentially. Because Lee, Kirsten Dunst, is taking her pictures in color. Jesse, Cailee Spaeny, is taking her pictures in black and white.
Yeah.
And there's obviously I felt as though maybe there was some difference to be found there. I'm not sure what it is or what Garland might be trying to say with that difference.
I mean, what I was just going to point to is the inserted citizen journalism footage.
Oh, sure, yeah, at the very beginning, yeah.
And just as a sidebar, I don't think Alex Garland knew whose footage is being used.
I don't want.
I just my whole thing is I don't think that is illustration of a political point or shortcoming.
Okay,
I think it is a little bit sloppy.
Sure,
but I just don't think that is the gotcha.
Reverse. So what you're saying is are you saying that Alex Garland was not involved in that decision, or that he doesn't know who Ang Ding-no is?
What I'm saying is that there's probably somebody who pulled this footage, who might not have known the source. Alex Garland that looks okay, we put it in the movie. I think it's an oversight. I think that the fact that footage is in there illustrates a difference between how real world photojournalism is conducted and how our characters operate. And that one is very on the ground and guerrilla and instantly uploaded and viral and social. And the other is more traditional, like 70s style journalism. The only thing at sidebar I was trying to make is I think that the people who are hyper focusing on the source are maybe ascribing more ill intent to an oversight.
I think so. So. I would agree. I don't think Alex Garland was trying to be like, well, let's both sides this and get some footage from Ang Ding-no. Because you see it for like a half a second. Yeah.
But it's just the ultimate point for me is I feel like even the inclusion of that footage illustrates that what our characters are doing, to me, doesn't feel that important.
Okay.
I think that's part of my issue I have.
Yeah.
It's like, because if Alex Garland, again, I think you make a fair point of the movie shouldn't feel too of the current cultural moment. But if our journalists are operating in a way that is not, like, relevant anymore, you're not going to find any non-partisan journalists anymore.
There is zero time ascribed to them explain, or them even, like, trying, well, I shouldn't say that. At the very beginning, Kirsten Dunst is like, I'm trying to upload some files or whatever. The Wi-Fi is bad.
The Wi-Fi is slow.
Yeah. But after that, there's no time given. And I mean, it's not like this film is like a journalism movie in how it does the process. It's more Alex Garland meditating on what is the role of journalists in wars, domestic and foreign. Mostly, obviously, in this case, clearly domestic, but
foreign to him,
and also something that our characters, if we are to believe they are like us and exist in a world that it was like ours before the Civil War broke out, like how does the war being domestic, being a domestic civil war, how does that impact them in their work? And that is clearly what is happening with Lee's character, Kirsten Dunst. Kirsten Dunst, the character of Lee, I should say. Because she is very much this hardened, she's jaded, she's seen it all, she doesn't really care, she's like, hey, you're just there to take the photos. But I find that what Garland is saying with her and her character arc, as she gets more and more sort of disheartened and disturbed by what is going on here. I think the key moment for that is when Sammy gets shot and dies. She takes a photo of his body and then deletes it, which is, I think, emblematic of her being like, it's just too personal to me. She's finally taking these things personally. She has her, like, shell shock moment at the siege of DC when she's like, I can't, before she ultimately locks in. But like, and that, what is that moment supposed to be? Is that her getting over it and realizing that yes, it's hitting close to home, and yes, it's disturbing that it's happening here, but I still have my job to do. I mean, I think that could be it.
I mean, there's an interesting exchange early when Cailee Spaeny is reflecting on, I believe it's after the gas station scene, but I might be getting the order of events wrong, where she asks Lee if I got shot, would you take a photo of my body?
Yeah. It's when they're in the parking lot with the crashed helicopter,
Yeah.
which it's really like the big mentor moment from
Yeah.
Lee, passing the torch, teaching Jesse how to be an impartial sort of photographer.
Yeah, and I mean, like, then obviously, as you're illustrating, we see the end of that arc.
Uh-huh.
But I guess I don't know is Alex Garland trying to say something about the morality of our journalists, and is he trying to say something about the morality of journalists as a whole?
Because I don't find that the film is saying it's bad that they are neutral.
Well, this is what's interesting to me, because I feel like the neutrality is not even really reckoned with.
Okay.
I think it's more of like a lack of empathy.
Sure.
I almost feel like that because it's not that Anne reaches an ideological difference on like her career body of work level. It's an interpersonal warming and an empathy that she then gets and she deletes the photo, and then obviously sacrifices herself to save Cailee Spaeny.
Yeah.
I don't think that that's necessarily like an erosion or a change of perspective on the neutrality. I think it's more like a gaining of a moral compass in some ways.
Okay.
So I don't, just as evidenced by what I think is an interpersonal character arc. But it then makes me wonder, is Alex Garland trying to say that journalists are immoral and need to have a higher degree of empathy?
And this could even be getting into Alex Garland being, maybe not talking about journalists specifically, but filmmaking. You know, I mean that's a whole other can of worms, obviously. But this is what I'm getting at when I say I find Civil War's stance on journalism as a theme and a profession and something that is important. I don't think that Alex Garland or the film is saying that journalism is not important.
No, it's important enough that it's the centerpiece of the movie.
Of course. But I find that there's so much confusion about what the film is saying with it. It is important, but I don't think that was really questioned going into the film.
No. Well, this is another meta point that Grace Randolph makes. And I don't necessarily agree with her conclusion, but there is no doubt, and I think that there's plenty of studies to back this up, that the trust in media is at an all-time low.
Yeah, but it's not like we see anyone distrusting the images that our characters are shooting.
No, but I think that that's something that like Alex Garland, even if he's starting the script in 2018, has in the back of his mind.
Yeah.
It's not like in the last 6 weeks, we're like, these journalists might, what's the deal with them?
But
what I'm saying is, what is he trying to, what does Alex Garland think the audience thinks of journalists, and what is he trying to make them understand?
Sure. I think he is ultimately trying to valorize them, make them out to be heroes, but I don't know if it's entirely successful, because
I wouldn't say so.
Because what ends up happening is, yes, it's extremely exciting to see Cailee Spaeny, dodging across hallways trying to get the pictures, but ultimately this is what I'm feeling. I'm like, you're being reckless here, for incredible images, and I think that maybe it is effective in that, because these images, we see them in glimpses whenever our characters do take a photo. They are expertly composed, obviously. They are, they are under the view and direction of Alex Garland to be visually spectacular when they are taken. So they are great photos, and I think, as all great photojournalism should do, they tell a story unto themselves.
Yeah.
But and then you see, like, when Kirsten Dunst sacrifices herself and Jesse takes the photo of her, like, taking the bullet and dying in these still images. I don't know, is that supposed to be like an empathetic moment, or is that supposed to be a moment where, like, Cailee Spaeny is distancing herself from the human angle of, this is someone that she knew, this is her friend, she was with her in her dying moments, in her final days, and all she could do there is take the photo of her body and move on. There's no emotional reckoning with the death of Kirsten Dunst's character.
I think it's the latter. And the reason I think it's the latter is because, as we were talking about before, the moment of Cailee Spaeny being distraught at the idea that Lee would take the photo of her dead body. Mm-hmm. And we see Lee come to, I guess, be better, to use a loose term, but, have greater empathy, delete the photos we keep
Yeah,
an
yeah,
example of. Cailee Spaeny, in some ways, if we're thinking about this like a moral dial, which way is a dial going to land,
course,
right?
yeah.
Fucking, like...
Is she a good character, or is she has she grown or regressed as a person?
I think she's regressed.
Okay.
I feel like it's hard to look at the pieces of evidence of Kirsten Dunst has to learn to resist the impulse to take that photo of Cailee Spaeny's body.
Yeah.
That Cailee Spaeny took that photo of Kirsten Dunst's body.
But Kirsten Dunst said that she would take the photo earlier in the film. She's like, Cailee Spaeny asked, if I died, would you take a photo of my body?
Sure.
And Kirsten Dunst says, yes, I would.
Well, and that's a fair point. But I guess it's that we as the audience, at least, come to learn, because the moment of deleting Sammy's photo is a private one.
Yes.
We come to know as audience members we come to, I think, get enough evidence to piece together the idea that the photo of Cailee Spaeny's body shouldn't be taken.
Of course, and that's emblematic of the moment when we're like, oh yeah, I liked Sammy. It's good that it's a little bit, it's crass and like disturbing to see a photo of Sammy's dead body to us, the audience, and to Kirsten Dunst.
Well, and I think the issue for the muddled themes of the journalism point is if we as the audience, Kirsten Dunst as Lee, come to know that these photos are wrong. The fact that Cailee Spaeny is taking it is an immoral act in the context of the script. Mm-hmm. So what does that say about the journalism in Civil War?
Yeah.
My problem is, and maybe I'm misunderstanding,
okay,
but my problem is I think that this reads as a film that is painting journalism as a morally corrupt force.
Sure. Okay, I get you.
Because the next generation of journalists we're training,
yes, Cailee Spaeny, yes,
immoral figures.
Yeah, become completely removed from the humanity of the situation. But isn't Kirsten Dunst doing that when we see her at the beginning of the film? These brief glimpses of seeing people shot and a man being set on fire as she just stands there.
Yeah,
there is this deliberate thing of like, yeah, she's also removed from the situation, and perhaps. I think we should also talk about Wagner Moura a little bit. Obviously, he gets much less time, much less characterization, but he is made out to be like this adrenaline junkie, essentially.
He's very Nightcrawler.
He's very Nightcrawler. And he wants to get the quote from the president, and that's his big thing. He wants to interview the president. And his final moment is the final line of the film, which is, he gets there. They're in the Oval Office. Nick Offerman's on the ground begging for his life.
Yeah.
And Wagner Moura says, wait, stop, don't kill him. I need to get a quote. Yeah. And he kneels down, and Nick Offerman looks him in the eye, and he says, please don't let them kill me. To which Wagner Moura responds, the final line of the film, that'll do.
I think that it's too ambiguous.
Okay.
I think it's a very ambiguous scene.
But he delivers it with such venom that I'm like, I think this film is clearly coming down against Nick Offerman as like the fascist president, which we already established. But like, and it is saying to me that Wagner Moura has finally, as a journalist, perhaps impartial, perhaps not, has brought his personal feelings into this story.
Yeah, I mean, this is where it gets muddled for me, is in a couple places, because on one hand, if Wagner Moura really just wants the story, well, it's a pretty good story that this big, bad president, at the very end, all he can do is beg for his life.
Right.
But that's a story right there.
Yeah.
That's, in the most literal sense, that will do. That is my lead. That's what I spin. Great.
Yeah.
But, to your point, it could be a moment of good. Fuck this guy.
But yeah, fuck this guy.
And I think that you have to take it to like that to some degree because he just watched a woman he's very close to get killed.
Yes.
For this story.
Yes.
What I'm unclear about then is that good or bad? Because again, we don't. I think that with Cailee Spaeny and Kirsten Dunst, I think either we start or end with a false premise. Either journalists are inherently immoral and have to learn morality, or or the profession of journalism corrupts somebody with good intention.
Okay, yeah.
Those are two, I think, bad premises.
Sure.
But I think two bad premises that have evidence in the film.
Uh-huh.
Does Alex Garland think that the we take the pictures so others ask the questions is the right thing to do?
Yeah.
Or is it the wrong thing to do? And
Yeah.
Wagner Moura has to learn to do the opposite. See what I'm saying?
I see what you're saying.
Because
Yeah.
if it is we take the pictures, others ask the question is right, and what we learn from Cailee Spaeny is that she comes to be immoral, then Wagner Moura also can be immoral.
Yes, like he has been corrupted by, you know, this thing happening to. Well, I was about to say his countrymen, but you know that's a whole thing in the movie too with the Jesse Plemons scene. But happening to the country in which he lives, to America, you know, he saw his friend die and everything.
Yeah.
I mean, there's just so many spinning plates at the end of the day with all of this, and there's so much ambiguity or nuance, whatever you want to say about it. Like, and is Alex Garland like? Is he positing all of this stuff because he's sloppy and doesn't know what he's saying, or is he walking on eggshells because he doesn't want to say anything specifically?
First of all, I have no thesis about that. I don't know.
Okay.
But I think that
No, I don't either.
Yeah.
I'm just kind of like positing a question
Right.
as you just did. Yeah.
I think that the ambiguity is the intrinsic problem. Because I don't subscribe to the Grace Randolph style notion of this being an irresponsible movie.
Of course.
I just don't think that that's really the right framework to approach a movie like this from. But I do think that it is a tough sell to get me to think that journalists are immoral. And
I agree.
and if you're going to leave breadcrumbs that I feel are pretty overt in the film to make me reach that conclusion, to me that is either you needing to have a much better script to sell me on a what feels like a wrong-headed idea, or there is just so much debris from maybe rewrites or as you're saying, eggshell walking, that the film just becomes ineffectual.
Sure.
But
okay,
let's zoom out.
Okay, let's take a step back.
I think that the reason that I hyper-focus on this is because on a base level, our characters to me aren't that interesting.
Okay, yeah, I mean, we kind of started talking about this, but then we went down a rabbit hole somewhere.
Yeah.
And this is my wider issue with the film.
Sure.
As I mentioned at the beginning, there are so many weeds to get tangled in when we talk about the political stuff, or even the journalism things, as we just talked about.
Right.
There are so many nuances or ambiguity to the themes, again, that I tend to just focus on, like, I don't know, these characters are so thin.
Yeah.
They're so thin to me. I mean, Lee gets an arc, I think.
Yeah.
She does, and Cailee Spaeny gets an arc, but the script for them and our human moments between them are so basic to me. I mean,
Yeah.
I wrote the script is also extremely the dialogue to me reads extremely basic.
Yeah.
I mean, there is no nuance to any of these things. There is no subtext to a lot of the things our characters are saying. I find it to be extremely face level.
Yeah.
And surface level, rather. I mean, our characters just say what they think. And you know, that they are very matter-of-fact people. I get that. They're journalists. They don't have time to mess around with or mince words. But being a journalist is not a character type, I don't think. I want some deeper material to these people that I'm following for 2 hours.
I said to you after I saw the movie that to me it reminds me a lot of The Last of Us, or a lot of the plot archetypes I think The Last of Us really brought back to the forefront. The idea of this big road trip, the idea of this young figure that softens the older figure.
Yeah, what is it? Lone wolf and cub or whatever.
Yes,
yeah, that's character type.
Yeah, that which The Last of Us shot right to the front of of pop culture again, and it's definitely a touchstone. For this. The reason I raise that is because these sorts of road trips, it's essentially a road trip movie.
It is a road trip movie.
But they are supposed to, in my opinion, invite these detours that give our characters a break from the critical path to learn something about each other. The Last of Us has plenty of these between Ellie and Joel, where they are. It's a humorous digression, an empathetic digression, even just a somber but unrelated digression that lets them learn more about each other, and they draw things out of each other. There is one in Civil War, I think, which is when they go to the town.
Yes. Oh yeah, we should talk. Yeah.
Where the war doesn't exist.
Yeah.
It's another very loaded idea that is also painted very poorly. Go ahead, because I know what you're going to say.
Okay, so so with the town thing, I find it to be. I think what Garland is doing with that sequence specifically is like that town is America.
Yes. Yeah.
It is like, hey, we have the benefit to not to have to worry about all this. We just try to keep our heads out of it, you know? That is the general American public when it comes to wars internationally.
Yes.
And they have the benefit to do that because, look up on the roof. There's the guys with the snipers. We are being overseen by a controlling militaristic force, and so the general public can just say, well, I don't really know what's going on out there. I just want to run my store.
Right. And I actually think that that's a good bit of commentary.
Yeah, I think so too.
I think that that's probably the most... I struggle to call it subtle.
Yeah, well, it's not very... I mean, the allegory is very clear if you give it a moment of thought. But it's a good allegory.
It's a good allegory. I agree with you that the whole, this reminds me of everything that I forgot, this reminds me of everything I remembered, is a little bit hammy.
Yes.
But ultimately, them being in the store, Cailee Spaeny making Kirsten Dunst laugh to get a good photo, Cailee Spaeny buying a dress, the chuckling about that, Wagner Moura putting on his funny hat, and Cailee Spaeny doesn't want to take a picture and waste a film. Like, that is the sort of stuff that gives him a little bit more life.
I agree, yeah.
But most of the time... We're reacting to plot.
Yeah, but also what does that scene tell us about our characters? That they want a moment of levity? I bet. Sure.
Yeah. No, I see what you mean, but I still think it's important to see that side of them.
And see I get it.
Cailee Spaeny's wit.
Yeah. You get all of that, but in a better film, that would be a nice moment in characters that have already been developed and have more development to come.
That's a fair point.
Yeah.
Again, to me, it's the one example of something that should be all throughout the film. Because they try again when Cailee Spaeny and Kirsten Dunst are in the bleachers together, and it's another tutoring moment.
Yep.
But it is, again, very, very, it feels very, like, purposeful. It feels like we're here to get a backstory from Kirsten Dunst.
Yes.
And that's the purpose of this scene.
Yes.
And I think that is a mistake.
Okay.
I think you need scenes that let us more organically learn about our characters and learn about the other dimensions and sides of them that aren't either so clearly to the point of, oh my god, Cailee Spaeny, let's learn how your character was changed by almost being killed in a pit of minorities who have been murdered. I feel so scared, but I feel so alive.
Yeah,
it's not effective.
These moments that are the moments that are supposed to carry the weight of development just don't, because it feels like first blush stuff. Yeah. It's Cailee Spaeny saying, "I've never felt more scared, but I've never felt more alive." I'm like, I can get that already, but like, what else? What more? It's everything I forgot, or it's everything I remembered. I wrote down a couple other ones if I can just pull them up here real quick. This is a whole other thing, and we're coming up on an hour of discussion here. We can get it to wrap up. We can get to wrapping it up, but like with the needle drops and stuff, I feel like they don't really, or like 50% of them work. Maybe they work about half the time, but like there's the moment where after our Hawaiian shirt guys shootout, a needle drop kicks in, and it's Wagner Moura like laughing, having a good time. You see that a couple of times, and then that's juxtaposed with basically a firing squad of the losing side. And it's like with this, kind of like an upbeat rock song over top of it. And then we're driving away, and Wagner Moura says, "Holy shit, what a rush!" I was like, "Yeah, I know." That is that is Wagner Moura's character before that sequence,
right.
And B, that's what the needle drop in showing Wagner Moura doing that implied to me. I just don't think it's very complex character work.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that like it feels like Alex Garland only had so many like character points to delegate.
Yeah,
he's making if this entire script is an RPG.
Perhaps if our characters are too fleshed out, that weighs upon what he's trying to say with the role as journalists.
That's a good point, but
Yeah.
again, this is the issue. If the characters aren't that well developed, and the journalism stuff isn't clear, what do I really grab onto?
Yeah.
If not for the visceral element of the film.
Yeah,
That's probably the last thing we should talk about.
That's really not up for debate between the two of us.
No.
I mean, with any reviewer or critic on this film, I would say it is extremely well done action filmmaking on a very limited budget. This is a $50 million thing. I mean,
Doesn't feel like that.
The visual effects are all very good, but what really drives it home are the technical aspects, whether that be the sound or the lighting or the editing or what have you. That's all that's incredibly well done in these action sequences.
Yeah, and I mean, it just is very scary.
It's super scary. I mean, I'm seeing people call this the scariest movie of the year, and from those standpoints, from the action sequences and the much lauded Jesse Plemons scene, I understand it.
Yeah, because I think that is where Alex Garland's at his best behind the camera. I also think it's where sometimes the screenplay is the strongest. I think the entire scene with Jesse Plemons is obviously the best part of the movie.
I've also heard that some of that is improv as well, like especially the Missouri. That's the Show Me state. What does that mean? What does that mean? That's an improv bit between Jesse and Cailee Spaeny.
Well, that's because he's the greatest of all time.
He's the GOAT. He's kind of the GOAT.
He's just kind of the GOAT. But those scenes are really remarkable. And they both play to the strengths of the creative team, and they do play to, at a point that Tucker made that I think is totally true, the intrinsic animal-level fear that we have as Americans seeing this happen in America.
Yeah, I mean, something that has been brought up a lot is this idea of, like, the film treats this domestic warfare as, other Hollywood films have treated international wars.
Yeah.
With not a lot of specificity, with a lot of vagueness, but also that's not good, and it maybe shouldn't be replicated.
That's my entire thesis on that point.
Yeah.
Because it is a problem of like American exceptionalism and like xenophobia and things that the other films poorly portray the places that we're fighting.
Yeah.
It's not a good thing that Alex Garland replicates that in Civil War, I don't feel.
Yeah.
But I also think that another place that I feel personally disappointed is this notion that the film, I don't think, does a good enough job forcing you to reconcile the fact that this is on American soil. I think you bring that into the movie.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think that that's a point where he could be nicely commentating on the general American malaise towards the various conflicts we get in overseas. I think that this movie is not able to, in my opinion, well enough sell you on the horror of this happening in our country to people like us,
to Americans, because we don't see a lot of that. We are quite focused on the events that happen to our characters on their road trip, essentially. Aside from the one town that they stop over in and the ditch full of dead bodies that in the Jesse Plemons scene, you don't see a lot of other Americans.
Yeah, and I think that is the issue, because I mean, largely separate political point, but I think a lot of the general American disinterest or lack of empathy for what our government and other governments do in the world at large is that it's not really humanized.
Yeah.
And even an interesting corollary here is the way that a lot of journalism, especially covering deaths in Palestine, are very dispassionate, impersonal about who is being killed.
Yeah, whether that be through what they show or how they, the vocabulary used.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I think that this film had an opportunity to particularize that by thinking, hey, the type of person that lives up the street from you is getting killed in this conflict.
I mean, the film opens strong in that regard.
Yeah.
I think the moment at the gas station is like that's the good first bite of what should have been a full meal of this kind of film. But it's kind of the only scene of its type.
Well, I actually think, and I feel like the scene has gone under the radar a little bit in terms of the discussion of the great ones.
Okay.
But the water riot. I think
the very opening of the film. Yeah.
I think that's extremely effective, because I think that another reason that it rings The Last of Us to me is I feel like the film takes on a very post-apocalyptic feel at a certain point, because it becomes so abandoned and you really don't see that many people. But in that first scene, like, this is just an American city.
Yeah.
And there's a suicide bomber here, and the police are killing Americans, beating them brutally because they protect water.
Yeah.
Like, that is really haunting, and I think that gets to the point that I wish the film hammered more towards. But it's so spare.
Had this film had $100 million, had A24 had the resources to give a film $100 million as opposed to 50 as their biggest budget, I'm sure we would have gotten more like that. So, how much you want to how much you want to weigh that out is up to your own discretion. But there are things like the gas station scene that can be done, that still drive the same.
Totally, it's an excellent scene.
Drive that same stake. Is there anything else I want to talk about? Oh, well, a quick thing I want to note that I don't know if has been brought up a lot elsewhere is the hotel at the beginning is obviously very emblematic of like what movie? It's a Vietnam War film. That all the journalists are at the hotel. I think it might be Good Morning Vietnam. Or some other film.
Sure.
It's like all the journalists hanging out at this hotel, basically, whether it be in Saigon or in this case New York City.
Yeah.
Like with the violence all around them, but they're clinking cocktails up there. That's
a great scene.
Yeah.
I love the concierge. She was like, "Ma'am, it's your choice.
Yeah.
But I wouldn't take the elevator.
Yeah.
But ma'am, it's your choice." It is this like trying to paper normalcy over.
Yep.
A complete chaos that I think is really effective. Mm-hmm. Again, though, does not really give me much confidence in Alex Jones' opinion on journalists when they're this...
Alex Garland, not Alex Jones.
Well, I don't have any faith in Alex Jones' opinion on journalists. Yeah. Alex Garland portraying these journalists as like, partying and laughing and screwing around in the middle of the war zone. I don't know. I don't think that's great...
Yeah, but the same can be said of like the depiction of journalists in. I don't think it's Good Morning Vietnam. I'm sorry, I forget what Vietnam film it is, but it could be Apocalypse Now. I don't really know.
It's not Apocalypse Now.
Okay,
I've seen Apocalypse Now. I don't remember that.
Okay. Anyway, it's a very similar depiction of journalism in that context. Where
that's fair. I just said that when you pair that with everything else we've been talking about,
I get it. So we didn't answer a lot of questions here. We maybe asked more questions than answered, but
I think that's okay.
Yeah.
I mean, I as critical as I am on the film, I feel like it's not one that you can jump to conclusions on.
No, absolutely.
But I do think that that's because the script is not that good.
Yeah. Okay. So for my actual thoughts on the film, and for the record, we should probably get some scores.
Sure.
Scores on record here. I feel positively on the film because it is well made from those standpoints.
Yeah.
And perhaps more than any film has in recent memory, or any film will the rest of this year, has made me think and ask a lot of questions.
Yeah.
And hey, maybe that's all Alex Garland wants you to do. Just ask some questions, Yeah,
and it's people who are just asking questions are always one of the best intent.
It's true. Just like journalists in this film. Anyway. I'm going to go like a 6.9.
I don't know, I'll give it like a 5.
Okay, sounds good.
I'm just very split.
I get you. Yeah. I totally understand. I feel positively on the film still. I have toyed around with going to see it again, actually.
Yeah, I've thought about it too.
Yeah.
I think because I want to know if I can find more out.
I agree. Same here.
If I get into it more, and again, to be clear, I feel like we didn't say it that much, but it's because everybody else is saying it already.
Yeah.
There is a visceral quality to the gas station scene, the siege of Washington, the apartment complex, Jesse Plemons, the opening riot. That's incredible filmmaking.
Yeah, there's really, really good stuff on display here, but just a lot of ambiguity in between. So thank you so much for watching. Again, as I said, if you had any thoughts on the film or anything that we said here, feel free to leave it down in the comments. We have a Discord server, link in the description, and we'll see you next time.